I'm Tuledi Makua. I'm Professor Tuledi Makua from University of South Africa. I'm the president of our Makua National Reunion. Then here comes a question of what is Makua National Reunion, MNR? I'm not here actually to talk about MNR. I'm here to talk about, I just want to talk about synergism. Togetherness of Makua in South Africa. If possible, maybe outside the borders of this country. But I just want to take a moment to say, who are we? These are the Makuas from Limpopo province. Who are the Makua in Limpopo province? Not only in Limpopo province, but Limpopo province in Mpumalanga as well as Gauteng. That is where this group of Makuas are concentrated. How did we come into South Africa? Why are we not a part of Makua in Durban? Makua, that side, came in as traders. Our ancestors, our forefathers came in as people who were selling, having some merchandise from Mozambique to come and sell in the older. Probably that time there was nothing Transvaal. There wasn't Transvaal. Because when we trace back the history of Makua, that side, we found that the oldest man, who is probably our forefather, was born around 1773. His son is Letlakana, was born somewhere around 1834. When they arrived at that site, they arrived in an area called Bokoni, Bokoni, Bokoni. It was an area for these people called Bakoni, who were a few people who were just selling and going back to Mozambique to stock and come back. Seemingly, when they were doing that, they ended up interacting with Bakoni ladies and they started to settle, bearing children up to us. When we trace it back, I am the 7th generation. That is Makua National Reunion. In short, we started tracing each other. We started looking around, who are we? Where are the other people? That is how we traced our roots in Mozambique. We are pure Mozambicans. Then how did it come that we use Makua, our language, as our last name, as the surname? Because when we arrived amongst the Bakoni, they couldn't understand our surnames. They're continuously asking, what are you saying? What are you talking? The only word that they could hear and grasp and retain was Makua. To them was quite simple. They ended up actually pointing at us saying, Makua, Makua. During that time, there was no Home Affairs actually when you come into a country, you register your surname. Then we started calling ourselves, they continued calling us Makua, Makua until today. You go to those provinces, when you say Makua, M-A-K-U-A, they're referring to this. M-A-K-U-W-A, they're referring to us. M-A-K-U-O-A, they're referring to us. That is us. We came in contact with our brothers this side. In our research, we were aware that we are having brothers and sisters in Durban. While we were still struggling actually to bring ourselves together, we came in contact with Brother Frank. He said, "Who are you? Where are you?" Started talking and talking and talking, and we are one. We are one. When I was listening to all the presenters here, very few mentioned Zanzibaris. And I was counting more, continue to say, we Makua. I said, yes, we are Makua. We are one. Pardon me, I just forgotten the surname, the name. When he was presenting here, he said, he went back to Mozambique. He found his people. That says, we are one. We are one. He explained how did it come that we differ in color. Irrespective of that, we are one. We are one. I just want to go into the philosophy of synergism. As I say we are one, then there comes a question of saying, after this, will we continue as the Zanzibaris in Durban? Makua somewhere that side? No. This is the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the end of Zanzibaris that side. Makua in Durban. When we arrived at that site, the people that we were living within called us Matakas. Matakas means, in their language, means people who come in to trade and go back to their homeland. They bring along their merchandise, they sell, and then they go back. They called us Matakas. They continued to call us Makwapa. Makwapa is almost synonymous as the word kafir from apartheid. It's not a good term to refer to your brother or your sister. The Boers called us knopniese, knop nose. When they were looking at we looked so ugly that they called us knop noses. Gone are those days. We are us. We are one. Cooperation, it will be the command of the day. Working together will be the instructions that we will be receiving from our forefathers. Remember, good ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here because we have been guided by our forefathers. It's not because we are intelligent enough, but because our forefathers felt that our children cannot get lost. They shall come together, and we are together. They are so powerful. The presenters here common in us is conceptualizing everything because we are us. We belong together. Together we hold the idea that those terms such as Zanzibaris, Matakas, Makwapa, Nopnosis, those are just the ideas that are part of the memory, but not part of us. together, the common interests. When I was sitting here, I found very strong common interest amongst us. The interest of saying we belong together. We are identifying ourselves as Makua. We value ourselves as Makua. That is why I loved when I heard you saying we maintained our culture. We maintained who we are. Those are the values that we share. No matter how far in the north we may come from, we are having the very same values. We are having the very same interest as you are. We are one. We are having the inspiration to be together, to work together. Remember, inspiration is not something that will be saying how much money do we have to buy it. No. Inspiration is something that is inborn. Inspiration comes from inside. Every single one of us in here has got that inspiration of saying, we are one. Inspiration is never threatened by anything. That is why when you arrived here in that, I don't want to call it because it has caused miseries. When you arrived here, your inspiration to be together was never threatened, was never destroyed. Inspiration from inside out. Today you are displaying it. It is out. For us to move all the way to here is because we got inspired when we were talking to you that, do you know what? We're having our own brothers and sisters. We should go there. We should meet them. We should be together. Amongst these, there should be a trust among us. A trust that when we come here, we're not saying we're meeting people that who are they? Were they not actually maybe just calling us to come here to do something? Remember that the old system was having a policy of divide and rule. For them to entrench it in ourselves, we're told bad things about one another. To say, you know what? These ones are very dangerous people. Please don't associate with them. Probably when you arrived here, there were some attempts actually to say, please don't trust the Zulus, they are dangerous. Please don't trust maybe Indians, they are dangerous. I'm just giving this example because even ourselves, that's why when you go north of this country, you'll find the groupings called the Pedis, you'll find the Venda, you'll find the Tonga, the Shangans. We grew up knowing that if you want to fear in your life, don't be next to a Tonga, don't be next to Shangans, they are very dangerous. Vendas are very dangerous. As a Pedi, don't go to. Trust is going to build us. Trust amongst us will be the best building block of our synergism. Communication. Brother Frank started it. We loved it. We wanted to maintain it. Even after this, not only with him, but everyone who is in here, let us exchange communications. Prof, let us continue. Let's exchange communications wherever you are. There's another prof that I was talking to this morning, Prof. Our togetherness will build this. Communication is best and very strong if we give each other an attentive listening ear. But not only to listen attentively, but to understand what we are talking about. When we leave here to the north. We shouldn't on the way and say, do you know what? We don't understand. Why did these people call us? Why? Why did they call us to that side? When I understand, when we were talking outside here, we were of one way to say, do you know what? We are benefiting here. These people, these are the teaching aids that we have been in need of. These people are teaching us about Makua. We have gone a bit far, but these are taking us the furthest. You are taking us the furthest. You are the big shoulders that truly we are going to stand on top so that we are able to reach the sky. The will in us. I'm approaching the end. In philosophy, in mathematics, 1 plus 1 is equals to? In philosophy, 1 plus 1 is equals to 3. How possible is that? When you philosophize it, we say, these two we are not just going to be equals to 2, but we are going to be more than that. Our unity is going to make this Makua the strongest. Therefore, we are 1 plus 1. We are 3, not 2. We are more than just a mathematical equation of saying we are this. We are more than that. We are us. We are going to explore the alternatives of strengthening this. We will be seeking the understanding in each other. We'll be seeking the understanding amongst ourselves. And we're going to find it. We're going to find the positives only. Ourselves, we have found them. In you, good people, all the presenters in here, we found the understanding. And we regret, why did we miss you for such a long time? We need to have the reason, of course. Why do we think the philosophy of synergism will be our foundation? Firstly, we need to have knowledge of self. We'll have to have the knowledge of your own origins, the knowledge of your own ancestors. Truly, this is summing up everything that was said here. And that says, ourselves from the north were also talking of nothing else to say but to say, we're going through the footsteps of our ancestors. You just said it here. Therefore, our coming here was not a waste of time. You taught us. You cemented what we dreamt to gain. Together we shall be. Together we shall be the strongest. The Makua in the north are so far in my genealogical research, we have clocked more than 10,000. And when we go through the government documents, we are counting more than 1 million. Yes. The Makua in the north, that so-called but Limpopo province, there isn't a single village, I'm not exaggerating, there isn't a single village that you won't find Makua. Brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, so far, I would like to thank you all for inviting us, for bringing us here to teach us. This delegation will go home and will feed the North. I said that this is the beginning. Together, Makua in South Africa will be visible. I thank you.
To reshuffle the program, and we have online Dr. Arusha Abdul Rashid Istop, Ashura Abdul Rashid Istop. Did I get that right? Can we patch her in, because her contribution flows logically from Professor Makua's just input. So it's opportune that we just link them right now. Just 1 second, she's joining. Hi, Doctor.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. I'm glad to be joining all of you from abroad. It's only through the khair and the mercy of the Almighty that we are able to be celebrating this 150-year commemoration. I just asked for a second just to be able to share my screen. Can you all see the screen? Are you all able to see the screen?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Please click present.
Yes, I'm doing that right now. I'm not sure now if you can see my screen. Just a second, technical glitch. Okay, nevertheless, let me not be cumbersome with technological glitches. We can always share the PowerPoint at a different time. I was tasked with the topic of solidarity amongst the Amakua people, which flows from Professor's presentation that he has just done. And just for us to open up the topic of definition of solidarity and what it actually is from a scientific perspective will allow for us to be enlightened and to know how solidified the Amakua people actually are. If we stream up what the Oxford Dictionary says, and if we stream up what clinical dictionaries say, solidarity actually stands for a unity, an agreement, a feeling or action that brings about people together. Our understanding of solidarity is that it's a human value. And when it is a human value, it allows for people to resist adversity. It allows for people to rise through life. And it is synonymous with help, protection, and support. Therefore, solidarity amongst the Amakua people, as we know, is to solidify and nurture the essence of unity amongst ourselves, to protect our history and our culture, as well as to enhance the essence and cohesiveness of who we are as people, as the Amakua people. We are very fortunate today to be 150 years since we have arrived, 150 years in celebration, 150 years of who we are. What people do know and what we have solidified is our identity. Who are the Amakua people? From time to time, when you walk through society in KwaZulu-Natal, when you walk through society in broader South Africa, and even myself here in Doha, in Qatar, I have to ask myself, who am I? What is my identity? Where do I come from? And many a time, we find ourselves scrambling for an answer because in a South African context, we have never definitively had the opportunity to be identified. We were always known as other Asiatic. We were never classified. We were just by the way. But 150 years later, we have solidified our identity as who we are. We are able to stand tall, we are able to stand proud, and we are able to signify who we are as people. When we are asked, we will answer with pride. We are the Amakua people. We are the descendants of the slaves that came into South Africa. And we know who we are. We have transcended adversity, we have transcended struggle, and we have marked our name and our territory in a South African context. What else do we need to solidify? Who are we in a rainbow nation? We've got 9 different languages, but the Amakua language actually exists. It is solidified. It is still the vernacular that identifies us as people. It is still the vernacular that our parents, our grandparents have spoken and are still speaking. And it is also the vernacular who we understand as the youth, but we falter in not speaking to it and not speaking it on a daily basis. But the vernacular, it exists. Our culture and our tradition, we have solidified. Our culture and our tradition are one of the main factors that have promoted solidarity of the Amakua community. We are very fortunate, exceptionally fortunate, that we have still got people within the community that have enhanced the culture, that have enhanced the language, that have enhanced the tradition, and have passed it down from generation to generation, that it still exists, and it allows us to identify ourselves and our uniqueness in society. Various different cultural avenues exist, whether it be the Ratib, the Rafai, which is the Daira, whether it be the cultural process of the Nemwari procession, which is a translation of young woman into womanhood, or whether it be even the transition of young males into manhood. It exists. It is who we are, it is who we personify, and it is who we represent. The last thing, and the last most important point, which establishes solidarity even in communities, is a sense of family and the sense of kinship. We are all interconnected in the Zanzibari community, in the Amakua community of Unit 2. Somehow or the other, family bonds, family ties, family kingship all exists, which is what makes us solid, a solid structure that 150 years later, we are still able to stand proud, we are still able to stand unique, and we are still able to be here today to present to the community. As a community, I know we are a family. We are there for each other. We are supportive of each other. We are also known as the Amakua people. Whether you are in the CBD of Durban, whether you are in the CBD of Johannesburg, whether you are in the broad prospects of anywhere globally, if you speak of the Amakua community today, people can identify with who we are. People can say, I know XYZ person from this family. I was fortunate to be on a journey of pilgrimage this year to Saudi Arabia. And in our tour group, there were people who said to me, are you from the Amakua community? Are you from Unit 2? I have been in relationships with XYZ people for X amount of years, which shows that our community family bonds, our kinship, and who we are allow for us to be identified, even in such settings. Also, I was going to give us a brief walk through the existing literature, which exists from a scientific perspective on solidarity amongst communities, and solidarity amongst people. In a global context, there have been many articles that have been published globally throughout the years successively, which have spoken about the uniqueness of solidarity, which have spoken about the uniqueness and the kinship about solidarity in communities and the role that it plays. What is the true benefit? In a South African context, there have also been numerous literature that have been published that speak about the community solidarity and the sense of Ubuntu, is what it's known as in a South African domain. Similarly, in global context and in global literatures, they speak about community, they speak about solidarity in communities and what the benefits might be. The benefits from us that we would require and the benefits from us that solidify us is a sense of unity, a sense of kinship, as well as promoting ourselves in an economic perspective, in a research perspective, in a professional perspective. That is what remains as a solid structure and a solid foundation can bring. Just to summarize and just to conclude, not to keep us very long, the way forward I have basically looked at for the Amakua people is, what do we need to do? How do we further enhance our solid foundation that we have? What do we need to say? What do we need to promote? What is our objectives? What is our final aim, such that we can remain who we are today? When we look at the intergenerational gaps, although we have a solid structure of language, we've got a solid structure of culture, we've got a solid structure of kinship, we've got a solid structure of religion, often we are afraid. We are afraid to approach our elderly. And also, it's also unfortunate that a lot of our elderly have passed. We need to bridge these gaps such that we can further solidify as those that are still existing for generations to come. We need to also do more educational and research perspectives, action research, qualitative research with the people who still exist. This will further help us to solidify and unify our actual Amakua people. We need to act on the grounds of what already exists. We need to act on the grounds of the solid history that we already have 150 years later, 150 years into a democratic rainbow nation. Also, regular engagement. Regular engagement is necessary for us to formalize groups, focus groups, discussion groups, stuff that can further solidify what we already know. Also, a mechanism of our solidarity is being fair, being just, and being honest with each other. Those are the pillars that will enhance and make sure that the glue and the cohesiveness of the solidarity of the Zanzibari Amakua community still exists for years and years to come. 150 years later, we need to be in a conference where we are presenting what we have further solidified based on all the presentations that have taken place today that have brought us up until this point. We need to encourage solidarity amongst our youth, encourage solidarity amongst ourselves, encourage solidarity amongst even our children, whether we are present in a South African context, whether we are present in a global context, whether we are present in an international context. The solidarity amongst the Amakua people definitively exists. We have an identity, we know who we are, we have the solid structure, we have all of our needs and our wants. We need to further enhance it, and we need to continue on a solidarity plane. I will conclude, and I hope to share my PowerPoint with the panel at a later stage, just so that we don't have a delay due to technical glitches. It had a lot of content and good pictures that we could have spruced it up a bit, but let us not delay and let us proceed for the process of time. I thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Rashad Istop, for excellent and concise presentation. we're not going to take questions. And perhaps we can ask through the audience if they want to. They can drop off questions and we can post them to you on the chat. We don't want to lose the engagement, but we have to keep the show rolling. So we're going to pivot to panel 2. I want to call up Prof. Preben Karlsholm as well as the panel members for panel 2. Prof. Chapane, please come forward. And Devaka, can you please come forward? I'll get some chairs for you. Guys, can you help me? We're going to set it up as a panel discussion. So it's Prof. Preben who's going to be the discussant or the leader. We're gonna allow you to introduce your good selves for the sake of time, and I'm gonna request for Prof just to frame the session by giving just some introductory remarks, and then hand over to the panel members. Of course, he is the expert in these things. Go forward.
Oh, I have. But have we only got 2? Okay. Right. Thank you. So, the title of panel 2 is Memories of Resilience, Culture, Language, Education, Religion, and Economy. And we've got 2 presentations, one by Professor Chapane Mutsiwa of the University of Eduardo Mondlane in Maputo, and one of the organizers of this conference. So he has been involved in defining the themes for it and the sub-themes for it. So his presentation will be central for us. And after Chapane, we have Dr. Devaka Premawardana of the University of Emory University in Atlanta. Yes, thank you. And who's an anthropologist who will speak on northern Mozambique also and about Christianity among the Makua of Niassa, right? But should we do Chapane first? So in the order that's given in the program. So, and I suppose we have, let's set aside 15 minutes for each presentation. So if you can stay within that time frame, it would be lovely. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Preben. You know, it's dangerous to me now because Professor Preben is my mentor concerning the Zanzibari Makua community. Before I met my family, he met them and told me about them. So it's a challenge now. I'm lucky because I was clever, and I'm not going to talk about the Zanzibari Makua community because I don't want to have his hands hitting my head. So I'll try to make my presentation short, but it's very huge what I propose to myself. It's to talk about the history of Makua in Mozambique, because that is where everything began, right? So I'm not sure whether the slides are there, but if they are not, okay, all right. So let me go directly because time is now our concern. The Amakua are the largest ethno-linguistic group inhabiting the territory of Mozambique, you know, and they are among the most represented societies in the regional diaspora, as we have heard here. So we have Makuas almost everywhere in southern and in Africa, in Indian Ocean also. You know, I will talk about the origins of the Makua later, but just I want to highlight that the origin is traced from the mythical Namuli Hills, located in the high Zambezia in central north of Mozambique, where through all the oral traditions among Makua people are connected to these Namuli Hills or Mount Namuli. I'll try to give some short explanations because we came with people from Mozambique who are not understanding English presentations. So I will also try to make some bridges for them to understand. Portanto, eu não vou falar da comunidade porque está aqui o mestre que me trouxe aqui e ele vai me bater se eu errar, então eu vou evitar cometer erros e vou falar da origem dos Macuas no geral e a sua expansão, que é um processo longo, portanto, a partir dos Montes Namuli, mas principalmente a partir do processo de imigração. Well, immigration process is also very interesting and important for all the history of configuration and reconfiguration of all of us, all the societies we have now. So, but in Mozambique, although the Makuas are the majority, or let's say not the majority, but it's the hugest ethno-linguistic group, their history is neglected somehow in the historiography of the country. So my paper tried to examine the different narratives about the origin and development of this group, ethno-linguistic group, or Makua. So I'll be talking based on some literature review and fieldwork research I've performed between 2010 and 2021. So concerning the origins of the Makua, there are different theories and speculations about the origins of the Makua people. I will only focus on two of these theories. Portanto, há muitas, sobre a origem dos Macuas, há diferentes teorias, e eu vou me focar em duas. The first is the process of Bantu migrations, or various layers of migrations to the region of Makua land, or Makuana, how has it we call it, and some scholars like Joseph William Bliza, who propagated it through scholarly networks, the name or this toponym of Makuana. Portanto, and the myth of the Namuli Hills is these two. I'll be yes. So I'm using these maps made by Carol Vargas, who proposes these different routes of immigrations, of the Bantu immigrations, you know, from around 2000 years BC, and also by 1000 years BC and 500 years AD. So it's a long time. I will not be focused on this process, but this is very important to know how the Makua came to be the Makuas. The roots and theories about Bantu migration were mainly established by Thomas Huffman, David Phillipson, and Roland Oliver. I will not go through to these three theories and roots, but just to summarize them. So there are mostly two roots which are important for us. The one that comes from the Great Lakes in Central Africa, for instance, the Zimbas and the Maravi, and the eastern route that comes down from East Africa to the region of Mozambique, coming down to here, to the regions of South Africa. There was another central line that crossed Zimbabwe to the region of Mapungubwe, and then to South Africa. Yeah. Well, all the two routes that came to what later became the Makuana, they encountered two main groups. One is the Pygmies, and the other one is the so-called Waka Waka. And the Makuas first were, or the main group that came and later was mobilized as the Makua at the Maravi. Although some scholars also point to the Zimbas, who also came down through Central Africa and Great Lakes to the region of northern Mozambique, and well, let's say central Mozambique through the Zambezi River, and then they went up to northern East Africa. So the studies on the Makuani region, which according to Mbiliza, should include all the coastal seats, suggest that the first inhabitants were the Waka Waka, who might have interacted with the earliest waves of Bantu immigrants. While the Zimbas or Marundu, also called the Lundu, in the 16th century, the Maravis in 17th century, and the Ngunis, I'll talk about these in 19th century, among the last groups who came to the region. The Lundu or Rundu are often confused with the Zimba, and their origin is traced from the region of Great Lakes. Lupi, Eduardo Ducoto Lupi, a former colonial officer who worked several years in Nampula, associates the Lundu or Rundu with the Lundu Empire in the Zambezi Valley. However, recent studies reveal that the Lundu or Rundu were part of the Maravi Empire, which flourished between 16th to 19th centuries and integrated the kingdoms of Undi, Lundi, and Karonga. And they are all originated from Fidi clan of the region of nowadays Malawi. So this is a later wave of immigration. And that's why it's very important to talk about the Nguni, about the Mfekani, because the process of Mfekani, it's a long process. I will not go through it. That influenced the migrations of the Ngonis to the north and some other areas in southern Africa as well. It's classified as the among together with the jihad by Usman Danfodi in West Africa, they are classified as the main revolutions in southern, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa in 19th century. So just to highlight how it was really important for the reconfigurations, not only of the demography of the region, but also of the political map in the region of Southern Africa. So, and they influenced not only the creation of the state of Gaza in southern Mozambique, but also some other states in the north, so the Fidis among those Ngunis, and in the north of Mozambique, they were also called Mafiti or Maviti. And some of the Makua groups today, they are believed to descend or to be also influenced or mixed with the Nguni people. Those are the so-called Ashaka, for instance. And Gerard Lisgang, a German scholar who worked almost 5 decades in Mozambique, said, well, Gerard Lisgang was my professor. He passed away. It's very difficult to talk about this now because the name came up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, he was a very influential scholar for us. Unfortunately, the nature. Yeah, now I got lost. Okay, let's move forward. So the process of immigration brought conflict, but also integration. On the one hand, let's say, on the one hand, there are conflicts that led to the removal of some of the groups to other regions or the quasi-extermination. And the other hand, through integration using intermarriage systems, sometimes forced intermarriage system, they have led to a symbiosis which is still understudied and thus unclear. Thank you so much. So Melo Machado, another scholar close to colonial system in Mozambique, suggested that the Makua people are the result of the encounter between Zimba or Mazimba or Maravi and the Khoisan, while Gerard Lisgang, on the other hand, suggests that the Wamakonde of Cabo Delgado, also known in earlier literature as Mavijas, have the same mythical origin as the Makua people from the upper course of the Lugenda River. So this mythical origin is the Namuli Hills. So in the Makwani region, several groups, including the coastal Muslims of Angosh, Sangaj, Mojinkwal, Sankul, and Moma, have multiple narratives about their Makua identity. Some claim to descend from Maravi, others from Rundu or Marundu, but all share the Namuli Hills as their mythical place of origin. The claim for a common ancestral origin was established as the result of a long process of integration of different socio-demographic groups of the region. This argument seems to be more acceptable because the process of immigration to the region was not interrupted until the second half of 19th century. Well, um, some examples of these migrations and late migrations, let's say late comers or the latest arrivals in the Makuani. The Medo or Ameto of southern Cape Delgado, they arrived in the region where they live now, southern Cape Delgado and northern Nampula, let's say from the second half of 19th century. Although the first pockets of these societies that were there and then in the late second half of 19th century, they clashed again with the groups of Ngunis, the Mafits, who were coming, some literatures call them Magwangwara and some others Mafit or Mavit, and they reached the margins of Ruvuma, and then looking for arable lands for agriculture, they came back to Mozambique. It's believed that they reached the regions of Angosh and Musuril, but they had very influence in the region of southern Cape Delgado, and they forced a shift of states. And this is well documented in a book called The History or A História de Cabo Delgado e Niassa by Eduardo Medeiros, a Portuguese anthropologist who worked several years also in Mozambique and Eduardo Mondlane University. So these waves of the encounters between Nguni and Makua Metro in southern Cabo Delgado also created the so-called Ashaka, the Makua Ashaka of southern Cabo Delgado and northern Nampula. And the Mogovolas, who inhabit the district with the same name of Mogovola, under the leadership of a powerful ruler, Makua ruler, who resisted and led the resistance against Portuguese colonial occupation in the region of the so-called the Capitania Moro of Angosh, Kubula Munu. They also arrived in the first half of 19th century. And all of these people, the Namaralo or Namarais also, who inhabit the regions of Musuril and Monapo. And they go up to the coastal areas of nowadays this of Mozambique Island. They also came in the second half of 19th centuries. But there are also the Maravis, who were traders, and they came several times, and they were established trade routes between the coastal areas of northern Mozambique to the hinterland, to the coastal areas of Niassa Lake, but also to the areas of nowadays Malawi, the Nyasa land. And so many of the rulers of Mozambique during the 19th century, they were also claiming their origins from the Maravi, but they were also Makua. One example is Swaleh ibn Ali al-Moroni, known as Maravi in local language, Amakua Maravi, who was the ruler of Sankul. He was a nephew of a powerful sheikh of Kivolani, Maulit Volai. So these are the examples of late arrivals in Makuane. So to conclude, there is this sort of unity in diversity that was highlighted by all the presenters this morning and this afternoon. So the Makuas are so diverse, but they are united by, for one, the above mentioned myth of origin, the Namuli Hills. Second, the intelligibility of their different varieties of their language, Emakua. So we have Enahara, Eshaka, Embamela, Emedo, and the language of my friend Devaka, Eshirima, and many other varieties. And Emarevoni. Emarevoni. That's it. And another connecting issue is the Mahimo, singular Lihimo. All of us Makua people, we have Lihimo. Amlima, Ayaje, Aseleje, Amiraze, all of us, we have these Mahimo. And these Mahimos kept the structure of our societies for so long, and they still keep. When we go to the coastal areas where people, it's not only on the coastal areas, but also in the hinterland, people trace two myths of origin. There is this myth of Namuli that goes to the hinterland, and there is the Shirazi myth that goes to the sea and crosses Comoro, Madagascar, Zanzibar, Lamu, and goes to the east. This is southwestern Asia. I think I spoke too much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
You only used 13 of your 15 minutes, but I'll keep 2 minutes for you on credit for later.
Synthesis for those, because I forgot to translate. Portanto, nós macuas somos diversos, mas unidos. Há aspectos que nos unem, que são, neste caso eu evoco três. Um deles é o mito de origem, portanto, os Montes Namuli. Todos os grupos macuas, eles traçam a sua origem a partir dos Montes Namuli. E depois há a questão da inteligibilidade ou das nossas línguas, das variedades do Amakua. Todas as variedades do Amakua, elas podem se entender. Portanto, quem fala Amakua, não interessa que tipo de variedade, se é Nahara, é Marevoni, é Chaka, é Metro, vão se entender. Portanto, outra coisa que nos une são as Mahimo, portanto, que manteram a estrutura social organizada durante longo tempo, e você pode vir de 1000 quilômetros, quando você chega ali, você aspira e depois vai dizer, ache, o Miraziwana, como é que se diz? O Miraziwana Momola. Quem ouvir, vai logo, você é de lá, né? Então, já são irmãos e já a vida vai andar. Vai ter um quarto para dormir, vai ter água para tomar banho, shima. Tanto Karakatani, Kala, como disse o nosso grupo musical aqui para comer. Portanto, era só para sintetizar para os companheiros, amigos e irmãos. Muito obrigado, Sr. Preben.
Obrigado. So next we have Devaka's presentation on Christianity among the Makua of Niassa.
Mohilaliwa. Miu insina naka devaka kohakalala okalavava kinvaha kintuna ovaha isalamu atu teni asinta mueneaka Amakua. Também quero cumprimentar meus colegas, irmãos e irmãs de Moçambique. Desculpe que vou apresentar em inglês, mas podemos falar depois. Oh, it's working. Very good. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, very, very happy to be here. I've been asked to speak about the theme of Christianity among the Makua of Niassa. I've expanded it to say a little bit about northern Mozambique in general. First, who am I? My name is Devaka, as I said. When I was living in Niassa, in the district of Maua, my name is very unfamiliar, so people heard me say devagar, which in Portuguese means slow. So my nickname became Vakani Vakani. which sounds a little bit like devaka, devakani, vakani. So that works for me. Ntoko namamria. Yeah, so I'll get right into it. The history of Christianity. Okay, let me first say a word. I'll follow my slides here. On the right side, you see the light blue, not so light, kind of light green blue is, of course, where the Makua population is. And I think one thing that I'd like to point out, which may not be as evident based on many of the presentations we have had, is how far inland the Makua population goes, all the way to Lake Malawi. We tend to talk mostly about the city of Nampula eastward to the coast, and especially the Ilha de Mozambique, for good reason. But if you see on the political map, the province of Niassa is an inland province on the top left there. And I did my research near Kuamba, and as you can see, the southern part of Niassa is a Makua-speaking region. The other major group there is the Yao, which have been mentioned a couple of times. I've had the privilege of spending many years of my last 12 or 15 years of life, if I add them up in total, living in this district called Maua. There primarily as a friend, I like to think, who is welcomed by the community, but also there initially and continue to go as an anthropologist who is interested in sharing in life with people who are different from me and seeing the possibilities for a common experience and common humanity. So I'm going to talk a bit about Christianity, in part because this inland component matters for that, because this is where you find more of a Christian presence rather than almost exclusively Muslim, as you find further toward the coast. Vasco da Gama is where the story begins. He's been mentioned, but in 1498 arrived at the Ilha, obviously as an explorer, but also as a Catholic, and soon after him, Catholic missionaries set up their missions, mostly in this case along the coast. Portuguese at this period didn't go far into the interior, and so we have that early history of Christianity, but it didn't really take much, didn't really expand much. We can go to the next slide. This is the only nice map, helpful map I found about the religious demography of the country of Mozambique. This is the percentage of Muslims in the total population, so very much in the north. But what I think is telling is that when you start getting more of a Christian population, the further south you get from Zambezia, and then certainly on down. The majority of the population in the southern part of Mozambique is Protestant Christianity, and that has to do with your country of South Africa, mostly because of the labor migrations and the bringing back of Protestant churches. But the point just to note for there is where we have the Muslim presence, but further inland, some of the Catholic presence. In Niassa, it's a particular Italian missionary order called the Consolata that arrived in 1926. That's just an early image. It's hard to make anything out there. But it's important to know about this history of Catholicism that there was a very tight link between the Portuguese Empire and the Catholic Church. In fact, one could say that the empire was a religious empire, or that the religion of Catholicism was imperial. And that's because in 1940, there was an important agreement made between the Portuguese Empire and the Vatican that effectively made put the two in collusion with each other. And so it was very clear that there was a colonial dimension to Christianity. And one saw this for sure in the efforts to eradicate things that were seen as primitive or as pagan, etc. And that included through the educational system, especially anything having to do with ritual practices like initiation rites or healing rituals. And even the Makua language itself was threatened as a result of the assimilation pressures placed on the populations by the Catholic Church and the Catholic missions, etc. And that was for a long time the history of Catholicism in the region. But something important happened in the Catholic Church in the 1960s. I'm not sure how well this history is known, but it was called it was a council of all the bishops and leaders of the Catholic Church worldwide, called the Second Vatican Council in 1962 to 65. And this brought about a radical change in the approach that most, not all, but maybe not even most, but many missionaries took to the work that they were doing. They went from being those who were interested in eradicating everything that they encountered to actually finding things of value and even promoting the validity and even the salvific or even sanctified nature of things that were earlier demonized. And that goes for perhaps nothing more so than language. Previous to the Second Vatican Council, Catholic masses were done entirely in Latin, the holy language of the Holy Roman Empire. And as a result of this transformation within the Catholic Church, there was an appreciation of the vernacular. And that included languages other than the European languages. And that included Makua, or the variations of Makua, the various dialects of Makua, so much so that the first dictionaries for all of you and all of us who are concerned with things like language revitalization or language preservation, it would be worthwhile to know that the dictionaries that you'll find, certainly the earliest dictionaries you'll find of the Makua language, are Makua Portuguese dictionaries, such as this one, 1960, done by, in this case, a Portuguese priest named Antonio Prata. So we have here an example of what we mean when we say that, and this is basically the theme that I'd like us to think about as through my talk today, is the question of in searching for resources to revitalize a sense of ethnic identity here in South Africa or in the wider Makua world. Where do you find those resources? Is it possible to do so within the immense amount of scholarly production done by Catholic missionaries? This is a question that's not for me to answer, but it's a question that I think all of you who are concerned with Makua revitalization should consider, because there are scores of volumes, dictionaries, grammars, anthologies of proverbs and local knowledge and collections of descriptions of, for example, rituals that could be of value. So I want to just take you through a few of them and a few of the key figures that you might know about already, but if you don't, I would encourage you to find the books that have been published by some of these authors. Perhaps the most cited and most important anthropological research done on the Makua of northern Mozambique, incidentally, from both Guruwe, which is where the home of Mount Namuli is, as well as Niassa, was done by this priest, later bishop, named a Spanish Consolata missionary named Francisco Lerma Martinez. He died recently. But you can see on the left his book, which was originally in Spanish, but it is in English, incidentally, as well as Portuguese, the Makua people and their culture. Please stay on that page if you don't mind. Go back to that one. And then you can see just an image of a book that was honoring him. You can see, and by the way, just the title itself, I think, indicates something of how he's remembered, I think for good reason. Don Francisco Lerma Martinez, around Namuli, in the vicinity of Mount Namuli, the sacred mountain, the place of origins of, and not only the place where people are said to have begun, but also to where they return, where their minepa, their spirits return, and the life and work in the heart of the Makuas. That's the other subtitle. That's the subtitle. Well, two subtitles there. Okay, and then another resource is by another very fascinating, I would say one of the most significant anthropological students, researchers, is here again, another person, if you go to the next slide, who is a foreigner and is a Catholic missionary, but also very sensitive to the language, in this case, the Lomwe language of Alta Zambezia, High Zambezia, and he lives incidentally right now in Nampula. He is still alive, although he's quite up in age. He wrote a book that's titled Introdução à Área da Makua Lomwe. I think that's the full title. But Makua Lomwe is there. It's another amazing resource, and I would suggest both this book as well as Lerma's book. They tell a lot about, for example, the myth of Namuli, as it was told to them, about conceptions of the self, about ritual traditions, about how community is understood, how authority is understood. These are some of the really rich offerings in these types of books. So in the next slide, I want to just share a little bit about the person who is closest to me and whose death last year brings tears to my eyes, as happens with dear ones who die. He's somebody who's lived among the Makua for over half of his life. I would say over about 40 years in the district of Maua. Padre Giuseppe Frizzi, he died of COVID, incidentally, 2 years ago. And I came to do my work in Maua, district of Maua, in large part because of him, because of the collection of collaborators that he had that I was able to bring myself into. He founded a center called the Centro de Estudos Shirima. That's the center of Shirima studies, Shirima being the dialect of Makua spoken in this region. Of interest, perhaps, for those who are working in a Makua research center to know that such centers do also exist. In addition, what I found very fascinating about Padre Frizzi was the degree to which he, well, here's the image of another point of how he valorized local artistic expression and sought to promote this among the Makua population. This is a mural that shows so much of what's important in the cosmology, in the natural world. You can see Mount Namuli in there. You can see the Mutolo tree, which is the sacred tree under which are done ancestral offerings in this part of Mozambique. And so much more that I won't get into now, but just as an illustration of what it meant for him to do this kind of work. In the next slide, he promoted, and he got in a lot of trouble for this with his fellow Catholic, and in fact with his superiors. He promoted the form of prayer that was made to offer, that is until today, made to the ancestors. That's called Makea, which I know goes by different names in different parts of the Makua world, but in this part it's called Makea. There's an illustration of a woman doing it, and there's an illustration of Padre Frizzi bringing it to Rome, incidentally, in this picture, but trying to, in fact, as he did, bring it into the church itself so that invocations and prayers to God always go along with invocations and prayers to the Makua ancestors. So he's a very unusual figure in this regard, very controversial for some of the things that he was doing, but very much revered by the population. So much so that they would say that he speaks. By the way, another illustration is, we have this, which is an encyclopedia, basically collecting proverbs about all aspects of life, titled "The Heart and the Home of the Shirima." And in addition, he did things like he revived initiation rites after the Frelimo state, the post-colonial state, tried to eradicate it. He brought Makea into the churches, and he was a linguist, a deep student of the language. People said he speaks Makua better than we do. The Muslims in the district where I worked called him Bambu Ahu, our priest. They referred to him this way. And so what I suggest in talking so much about him and about the others as well, whom I also knew, but not nearly as well as Padre Frizzi, is that there are a number of resources that are available for thinking about, especially language, but as well as culture and what he, Frizzi, very, very insistently called Etini Yamakolo, the religion of the ancestors, and taking seriously that this is not simply something animism or primitivism or something witchcraft to be dismissed. It's legitimate and it needs to be revered just as much as Christianity. He got in a lot of trouble for this, but this is one of the reasons that his plethora of volumes, both dictionaries as well as that encyclopedia, as well as his Bible translations and other things of a more devotional nature, could be of interest. How much time do I have? Am I out? 3 minutes. I'll just say briefly about my book that was up in the last slide, which is also treating the question of religion. In this case, what I ask and what I explore in this book is the failure of Pentecostal churches. Pentecostalism is a relatively new branch of Christianity, but the failure of Pentecostal churches to take hold in this particular part of Mozambique. What I hope is the originality of this book is that if you happen to know anything about the way in which Christianity is talked about in Africa broadly, It's all about this rapid explosion of Pentecostal churches. In fact, there's a famous study done of a mega church here in Durban, incidentally, an ethnographic study. But my work is based on my observations among the Makua of Maua district, where there are Pentecostal churches and where people are willing to go and participate in them and do all of the prayers very intensely. But to the frustration of the pastors, they don't stay within those churches. They remain connected to what they call their Igreja Samai, or their Itini Samai, either Islam or Catholicism, or for sure their Etini Yamakolo, their ancestral religion. So it's that fluidity, that mobility, that's the theme of my book. And just to give a few cultural touchline, I try to make sense of this in terms of what I learned with the help of Fritz's collaborators and all of the others whom I came to know during the few years that I lived in this region. A couple of points that make that illustrate this quality of what I'm calling fluidity or mobility, religious, a capacity to move in and out, is the cross itself, for example. Usually we see the crucifix or the cross as right angles. But one of the things that was very important for the Makua people in this region, and that Fritzi very much wanted to promote, is a much more, how shall I say, along the lines of what Professor mentioned, a more inclusive or open form of being that's suggested by these curves on the cross. Not right lines, but something more cyclical or circular. And you can see that in the shape of the cross. On the dictionary, there's a tortoise or turtle. And the saying there in Makua is kapa oneta nempawe. Kapa oneta nempawe. And this is a value for the Makua people in this region, that they want to be like the tortoise that walks with its home on its back, that walks with its home. In other words, it's at home wherever it goes. And this kind of comfort with movement is a very crucial part. And the last slide that I'll show, and this is where I'll stop, is, it was mentioned earlier, the importance of cassava or roots, yes? And on the next slide, I want to just say one of the things that the pastors of these churches often said to me is that they get frustrated here in this part of Mozambique more than anywhere else, because they say the people here are too rooted in tradition. That's what they would say. And I wanted to explore that further, because I knew the importance of roots generally. Roots are very important as gifts when you're, or as medicinal substances. Roots, cassava, very important. And one of the things that I said to my friends, one of my friends, when I was asking about this, I asked him to tell me a little bit more about roots, and he told me something that was very odd, and it didn't make sense to me. He said, our veins, meaning the veins of blood going through our arms, are our roots. And that didn't make sense to me, because I understand roots to be that which plants you to the ground, but veins are things that move through you. And when he associated these two ideas, he basically said, he said it like this. He said, veins, or misempa sahu, is that which allows blood to circulate through us. And then he stood up and he walked around and he said, that's what allows us to circulate. And then by saying that the mikakari misempa, that our roots are our veins, what he was saying is that his understanding of roots is not that which stabilizes us, but that which mobilizes us. Roots in this case, and this is perhaps something that I would offer as a potential resource for all of you who are thinking about finding roots in the Makua world. In this case, roots are not things that can cause you to be stuck or fixed in place, but they're precisely that which does what Padre Fritzi, I want to cite him on this, said is characteristic about this Makua disposition toward change, this Makua disposition toward movement, what he called at one point elasticity of the Makua. Or in another phrase that I loved, and it's only beautiful in Portuguese, alegria da alteridade, he would say. This is what's characteristic of the Makua, the joy of difference, the joy of engaging with difference. And I hope that this brief illustration helps to make that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Devaka. Yeah. No, but I think we'll postpone discussion until after. We have only one more presentation for panel 3. So I think we are going to include that one now from Sarifa Mula Nernes. And then, so she'll have 15 minutes online, and then we'll have 15 minutes of discussion, and that will close off the academic program. Okay? Well, you can stay, and then we'll have a panel question, Q&A with Sarifa. Welcome, Sarifa.
Thank
Good
you, Prabhan. Nice to see you.
Lovely to have you here, and we look forward to having your presentation. Sarifa should be here, and this is her home, so I don't know what she's doing on that screen rather than being here. Anyway, but Sarifa will speak to us about cultural and language maintenance, shift and revitalization in the Makua community in Durban, basing herself on a very interesting and valuable PhD dissertation she completed for the University of Cape Town a couple of years ago. So please go ahead, and you have, if you can stay within 15 minutes, that will be great.
I will try. Okay, can you see my screen?
It's coming up.
Yeah, I will just make that big. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't see you, and I am not able to travel, but my heart is with every one of you sitting in Durban. Thank you so much to the research committee for this opportunity. Very quickly before I continue, can you hear me and see my screen?
It's fine. We can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity. I must admit that for me, this has been a journey of self-reflection, redefinition. It's been a difficult and challenging journey, as well as when you talk about identity and belonging. I had to go through this process of finding myself to be able to be comfortable in movement. I sit here speaking to you from Norway, and I'm comfortable being in Norway because I'm comfortable being a young Makua woman from a matrilineal society and able to stand tall with, on the shoulders of our ancestors and the legacy that they have left behind. I must admit very early that I am not a linguist, but I did a study in social linguistics, and that was through the guidance of Professor Rajend Mestri. And I will talk more to that. But I will very quickly introduce myself and talk about my research, what was the motivation, the challenges and recommendations. But before I continue, I want to show you the picture of these women, and please take a note of the old lady with the red shawl, and that is Majitan Suleiman, who was the first woman equivalent of Hafiz al-Quran. She is our grandmother, my grandmother's sister, Zamzam, the oldest daughter of Habib Suleiman. And the bottom is her sister, Nafisa Suleiman, who is actually one of the oldest living members in our community. She's, I think, 95 or 96, if I'm not wrong. As Preben said, I was born and raised in Unit 2 in Chatsworth. My parents, Jamila and Abdul, aka Stompi Mullah. I grew up as a passive bilingual. And for me, this quest to identify who I am came very early, around 1994, and when we opened up the borders and freedom of movement in South Africa and travel overseas, speaking about youth movement in South Africa and how it helped in the liberation struggle or the liberation of South Africa. And as the youth in the interviews and people discussed earlier, the question of who are you? What language do you speak? Where do your people come from? Began taking its toll on me. And so after my studies in the UK, I came back home and I had the privilege, if I may say so, of engaging with our elders in the community. Ashura mentioned that, sometimes we're afraid. I bit the bullet and I started speaking to our elders. I would spend hours with Haji Yusuf Mullah and his wife and just listen to their stories about how things were in the old days, their concerns for the community. Mr. Rapenta, Mrs. Rapenta, Mrs. Dalika, who played an integral role in one of my, sheroes because she helped, all. But I spent a lot of time with her in terms of getting guidance and helping to put together this thesis. Nafisa Suleiman, Zamzam Suleiman, Mrs. Muhammad Muasana, Bibi Khadija Sayed Akazi, Yaqub Abraham, people know him as Jacob, Aziza Dalika, Bibi Halima Giles, our old man Abdul Rahman, and my parents and many others contributed to developing the contents of this research. And before I continue, I think I have to share the challenges I faced as an internal researcher within the community. And one of the things was, as Brendan mentioned very early this morning, was research fatigue. People were tired, people coming in and asking them questions, doing these interviews, but were never, there was no follow-up. I think it was just my Professor Rajant Mestri that would come back now and again and visit the elders and connect with them. However, the outcome or the final outcome of the research, they never had access to. There was a lot of suspicion when I was doing my research in terms of who you were, who sent you, is there payment, who are you working for? And I think the internal politics of our community at that point and the issues around the ZDT did not assist the process. Another issue, another challenge was the fact that there was very limited information about the community. And one of the people that I read up on was Charles Kisebeth, who spoke about, there's a lot of missionary linguistics. And I think this is where Devika comes, mentions about a lot of the research done by missionaries and that have documented papers. One of my challenges also was when I was in Mozambique, getting access to information that was in Amakua and English. A lot of it was Portuguese, and it was it was hard to read. Also, I think one of the challenges, and this is again something that we need to reflect on moving forward as a community, is this thing of ownership of information. People have been sitting with a lot of information. I've seen a lot of information today that I have never seen throughout the period that I was doing my research. And I think that we need to remember that knowledge is there to be shared, and we shouldn't be owning information that needs to be visible and accessible to us, especially as young people that are growing up, that were growing up at that point. I'm not so young now, but our youth, they need access to this information to, what Steve Biko always spoke about is self-definition, self-pride, and self-actualization or self-reliance. And for us to be able to have a sense of pride and actualize to our full potential, we do need access to knowledge and information. This brings me to my research. And before talk about Fishman and all these others, I want to go to a quote by one of the elders in our community. And when I met her and sat down and spoke to her, one of the things that she said, that as elders in the community, they were afraid. They were afraid for the future of our community. And she said, "Wona hima wo makua wihizue like en limino wanyao. Wihizue like a minlati za makua." And that, you know, interestingly enough, one of the people in the audience asked this question to Preben earlier on, you know, with the gradual loss of language, are we able to say that we are Makua? And this was the concern of our elders. And therefore, I would speak to the vision that they had and how they worked back in the day to ensure the establishment and the maintenance of our community. Globally, language is the dynamite of thought. If you kill or render impotent a people's language, you can as well kill the people. But if you effectively plan or develop a people's language, you are laying treasures that can affect eternity and providing the people with tools to self-identity, self-actualization, and self-promotion. And that's Adegbija from his publication in 1993. And I think, you know, this is very key in terms of where we need to go. These are things that we need to reflect on. What is our vision? What do we want? Where do we see ourselves in the future? And a lot of you have come across CDAT's research, which was actually built upon Oosthuizen's research. And Professor Oosthuizen was brought to the community by our very own Aziza Dalika when she was at UDW. And CDAT basically built on his work. And she did a lot of interviews with our elders in the community to talk about, basically looking in terms of how the community was created and maintained. And she broke it down into 5 stages of the relocation of Amakua from former British protectorate to Natal, the fact that when they came to Natal, they were placed at the point. Then she speaks about the pass. One of the things she highlights, and she gives a detailed account on religious observance and beliefs. She then talks a bit about King's Rest and the way the community lived. And then she looks at the reclassification as sort of the seal to maintaining this identity of Amakua, or the Zanzibari community in Durban. Now, with regards to my research, I did use Oosthuizen, I used Sidat's work, but also did my own research, as well as did a comparison to my findings and that of Professor Rajend Mestri, who started coming into the community and doing research in the 90s. And his first publication was in 96 around the Makua. And one of the things he captured, and I confirm in my research, is the uniqueness of our community. The uniqueness in the sense that we were not linguistically diverse as many other migrant communities. And so we came from, again, highlighted Nampula and the region around the east coast and the north of Mozambique. Mestri also highlighted culture. And one of the interesting things is, again, when, we talk about the birth of children, the rites of passage. And when we're talking about the rites of passage, we're talking about, the Nimwari ceremonies or the initiation process, Mverani, the process of, initiation and passage from boyhood to manhood, marriage, death, and storytelling. And I think I want to just delve a little into this, because this is what sort of helped the community to be established. We were different, and it was, spoken about earlier on that, white people saw us and couldn't fathom, we were so different from the local population. But when it came to, I think the thing that was a deciding factor and the thing that helped is the way we did things, the traditions that we upheld when a child was born, the rituals that were connected to the birth of a child, and the fact that that child would have, like a godmother, Amea Mwali. When it came to the rites of passage, or when young women went through the menstruation phase, the Mea Mwali and the Muetis come into play and assist and guide these young women through this process. And even in marriage, I had experienced that when, when I got married, and the process or the passage from being a single woman to being a married woman, and the counseling and guidance that I was given by the women elders. And then upon death, the way we honor the dead, the 40 days. I remember stories, my dad used to tell us about how in the old days, when somebody passed away, people would stay at the house of the deceased, and our elders like Haji Yusuf Mullah and many others, Mr. Rapenta in particular, who is very talented and gifted in storytelling, and they would tell them these different stories. And these are things that unfortunately have not been documented, and it gives us and these are things that we need to consider in terms of how do we document these stories that were told, when we're staying at somebody's house where there's a death in the evenings, about the rabbit and many other stories which don't come to mind at this point in time. But these need to be documented. The other thing is religion. And Preben earlier mentioned about the Sufi network. And the elders were very proud of the fact that they were able to hold the community together. They used to have zikr on a weekly basis and other things that were maintained to ensure that the community remains together, follows their religion as well as the culture, and that the language was an imperative. I remember Mr. Yaqub telling me that, he went to Saint Javier. He went to a Zulu school. And one of the things that they were told when they would come back home, be it from an English-speaking school or a Zulu school, was that when you come here back home into the community, you leave the language at the gate. The English and the Zulu, you leave it at the gate. And from now on, you speak Amakua. So I'd like to, pull on or draw on the activism and the vision that our elders, our ancestors, our forefathers and mothers had. And the vision of keeping us as a distinct and unique identity in South Africa, be it the Zanzibari, or as we now have come to know and confirm that we are Makuas, and fill us with that sense of pride of being Makua. And the picture here is my great-grandfather, Habib Suleiman, with his wife, our great-grandmother, Granny Amina Suleiman. And Habib Suleiman was one of those people, one of those visionaries, together with Salim Tinambo and many others who played a pivotal role to ensuring the maintenance of our community, that on this day we can be here celebrating 150 years together. One of the things that Habib Suleiman used to do was to adopt people into the community. And it goes back in terms of speaking to the openness and the inclusivity of the community, and giving the community the strength in numbers. And we have become a formidable group because of these strategies that were unknown to us. And we probably, as young people growing up in Kingsrest, those that were, they could not understand why, these older generation was so welcoming in taking in other Muslims from different backgrounds. And I think for me, one of the fascinating things growing up, and this is again a confirmation of this attitude and this vision, was speaking to Mastan, old man Mastan, who has a background from Afghanistan, came as a Muslim and was embraced by our community and spoke fluent Amakua. And this is the beauty, where when people settled into our community in Kingsrest, and to an extent the early days of Chatsworth, they were they learned the language. And this again comes back to the vision, the emphasis by our elders to maintain the language and to teach others the language so that this language will be sustained for generations to come. And then we look at the fact that, the chairman of the elder committee spoke about, championing the ID instead of the dompas. These again were pivotal moments to ensure the security and the safety of Amakua as a group and community in South Africa. Championing the housing, education. If you went to speak to Mr. Rapenta as a researcher, or anybody for that matter, young people too, who's asked him, so, how was it in the old days? One of the things he always lamented about was how when they moved to Chatsworth, him, Haji Yusuf, and a few other elders ensured that young people in the community received education within the Indian school. So they went to Bayview School to speak and negotiate to ensure that the young people were accepted in these schools. So the factors that contributed to the maintenance of the community, culture, and language, above all, the role of our elders. They were visionary, they were activists, they were relentless, they were resilient to ensure that we stayed together as a community. The other thing that I think is very key that we never speak about, but is the role of gender, or in particular, the role of women in our community. The Makua are a matrilineal society. And one of the things that I realized and came to terms and talk about to an extent in the thesis is the fact that whilst we lived in a patriarchal society and men were given this role, but the women played a pivotal role as advisors. I remember many a times meeting the late Abdul Rahman, visiting his sister, Mrs. Dalika, where he sought her wisdom about certain things, or our late grandfather, Shahib Suleiman, and even Mr. Rapenta would go and sit with Majitan Suleiman and seek her advice on different issues. And there was, and when it comes to, Makua women, it's not about showing that, oh yeah, here we are feminists, we have power, but they had a power in terms of the knowledge and the wisdom that they had, but it was shared in a respectful way. It wasn't about power, it wasn't about ego, but they played a pivotal role in the dissemination of information from generation to generation. The language that we spoke, and when we speak about the language repertoire of the community, and especially in Kingswest, there was this understanding of the power of language and it being a key to identity, it being a key to self-realization and actualization. And so when our elders were ensuring that we would speak Emakua and encouraged us to speak Emakua, there was a understanding and a vision behind that. And I must say, personally, I would speak Emakua to certain elders in the community. We spoke mainly English. And the time that Makua would come in was when we were in a classroom situation and wanted to gossip about the teacher or our fellow Indian classmates. Then the Emakua, would come into play. However, it was just limited to those settings. And then it's the attitude. If you reflect in the old days when Makua was spoken, people used to say, "Ona achirele Makua." There was this sense of pride in the way you spoke a Makua, and everything that it had or carried with it, the pride, the understanding of the identity, the uniqueness. So there were so many elements, and unfortunately, these are things that as young people we did not learn at a very early age. And then again, the geography plays a pivotal role. So it's not just the fact that we came from a particular area in our country of origin, but when we were placed in Kingsrest, it was a form of enclave where we were able to carry our traditions, practice our religion, be Amakua, and be truly authentic to who we were. And so when we moved to Chatsworth also, we were still in this protected, we were still in this enclave where if you went anywhere in Chatsworth, they knew Bayview, that was Zanzi town.
Sarifa, I think we have to
How much
Can you
time do I
conclude?
have?
Yeah, because it turns out we have one more presentation to
Okay.
follow. So if you
Okay.
can wind up, it would help us.
Okay, I'm hopping. You will get the PowerPoint presentation, but one of the things, very quickly, the concerns of our elders was true, that the language in the community was shifting because English then dominated, which is the key domain, the household domain and the community domain. There was a lot of English, there was a lot of isiZulu, and the attitudes, especially around 1994 with rainbowism and Simunye and all these things, the shift was more towards English because English then became a language of status. If you could speak English, then, access to jobs, you become economically viable. All these things contributed to the shift. But what I want to say, yes, there has been a tremendous shift in the language that is spoken in the community. The younger generations are not speaking. However, one of the things that Mestri brought out was that the Makua or the Zanzibari community was an ideal example of minorities, of resilience. The fact that we were loyal to our language and culture helped us to maintain this linguistic, language and culture retention amongst small groups of people is possible, and that it does not preclude linguistic or cultural adoption to a wider society. So the fact that we were small, the fact that, okay, we were starting to lose our language, we did not necessarily become assimilated into other groups. The fact that small languages can survive despite their official neglect by educational and government authorities bent on imposing and promoting the codes of the more powerful. And lastly, that the linguistic repertoires of small communities can be valuable cultural and national resources. Here are several recommendations that I have shared with also our brother Jafar, but these are important things that we need to look in. The one thing here is, and I'm excited about the institute that was mentioned, and I think these recommendations will come in there. But lastly, I want to say that as we begin to rewrite our history, change the narrative, it is important to remember, acknowledge, and pay homage to the visionaries and the leaders, etc. We need to also heal from our intergenerational traumas of enslavement, apartheid, racism, and xenophobia. The internal conflicts in our community, we need to rebuild our community. We need to build trust, communication, collaboration, and to be more inclusive. This is a birth of a new era, a new vision, ideas, and energy. We owe it to future generations and the legacy of our ancestors to succeed. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sarifa, for this very important intervention. That was really rich. Thank you. We have one more presentation to go from Jesse Musa Katsinda, which will also be online. So we need to give 15 minutes to that, and then 15 minutes for discussion, for a couple of questions after that. So please keep questions you have for all the presentations. One short, important one you want to pose. So please, Jesse Musa. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you clearly. Good afternoon. Salama atuotene. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, my name is Jess Mose from Mozambique. I am a founder and the publisher of Etale Publishing, which is a publishing house that promotes an African narrativist. And I have been involved in the creation of the first Wikipedia page in Amakua language. So I have been involved in this linguistic and cultural activism. So I am a philosopher by training, and I have been also doing some researches in the African philosophy in general and Makua philosophy in particular. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to share my reflections on Makua philosophy. I have been invited to deliver an intervention on the topic of the philosophy of togetherness and solidarity among the Makua societies. And if we understand philosophy as a systematically questioning of the reality around us, means that all philosophical activity since its foundation must be linked to the culture. It means that all what we question and the way we use to answer those questions is hugely influenced by the culture we are inserted to. We call for a philosophical reflection, or usual, or it's a general conception, when there is no previous answer for the questions we want to make. So as human beings, we have been involved in situations where we have more doubts, where we have more questions than necessarily the answers. So where it is general in this kind of situation where we call for a philosophical reflection. There are some scholars, for example, Chukwumeka Mbeyangu, who says that the culture is a foundation and the raw material for a philosophical reflection. Other Kenyan scholar, Francis Owaka, considers philosophy as an open-ended debate in which the search for truth is permanent. We are no longer there, but we still permanently searching for truth. He also considers that, okay, philosophy is a discipline that inquires into the nature of reality, and a discipline that tries to bring a justification for beliefs we have as human beings, both at the individual or at social plane. In this sense, we can't speak about philosophy without referring to the culture. However, there are less references to the local cultural diversity in the Mozambican philosophical debate. That's why I decided to drive my research into the Makua philosophy. It's important to mention that we have no papers, or we have no numerous papers or written material on the Makua philosophy or on the other indigenous Mozambican philosophy. So I found some theoretical approaches, such as Odera Uruka's Sage philosophy and Alena Retova's Afrophone philosophy. Retovas extracts in her long and comprehensive research what she calls Afrophone philosophy to designate the discourse that fulfill the function of philosophy in a given African society. And those discourses, according to her, are not only written forms of literature, but also oral literature or popular songs and music. And the idea of Afrophone philosophy comes to revalue the African languages as reflexive languages, or as philosophical languages. She noticed that there was a medium of the traditional thoughts, reflection systems in African languages. And even though all the philosophical activity done in the African continent, it was just concentrated in European languages. So this approach comprises some discourses, most of them done as an artistical production. I'm referring, for example, to written literature, fiction, non-fiction, but also music, theater, and painting. So my utilization of this Afrophone philosophy approach is not reducing the Makua philosophy only has this philosophical reflection or these philosophical discourses only done in a Makua language, but I also mention all the work done by the self-called Makua artists. We know that in Makua area, artists tend to create their knowledge and their products not only in Emakua, but they do it also in Portuguese in general, and sometimes in other languages such as English. So, despite the language plays an important role, my criterion of defining Makua philosophy, it's not closer to the language criterion. Language is important, yes, this is very important, but I also introduce the criterion of identity. That's why my research considers Amakua creators not only those who are creating knowledge and content just in Makua language, but those who feel themselves Amakua, even without speaking the language. My justification for this position is that if someone is Amakua and does not speak Amakua, it was not of his concern. It was forced by a long process of displacing. They are calling for reparation and not for judgment. And doing so, also doing this work of analyzing the Makua cultural production, especially music and poetry, I found different categories and different elements, what I consider a Makua philosophical reflection done by these artists. So my presentation today is pointing just on analyzing Makua music, lyrics, and the poetries to extract the way two concepts are being discussed. I'm referring to the concept of togetherness and the concept of solidarity. And there are two categories I would like to bring to this conversation because we have no more time to continue discussing or going into deeper these different philosophical elements. But I would like to share with the audience two main ideas. One, or the first one, is the metaphor of man, water, and earth. And the second one is the law of return. I extracted these two approaches in some Makua cultural production. First of all, I will speak about the metaphor of man, water, and earth. The popular reggae musician Carlitos Namakoto from Nampula introduces the metaphor of man, water, and earth when he defines what is bad luck and what is good luck. He says that luck or good luck is when a man works in the land when the land is consuming water. The land consumes water when it rains. It will allow the man to have food, and it will not allow, it will also allow the land to be preserved. So A man who works in the land, when it rains, he will contribute to preserve the same land on the one hand. On the other hand, he will also have food. So this is a definition of a good luck. He also defines a bad luck, saying that bad luck happens when a man and the land want to keep the water only for their own particular purposes. So if the man and the water, if the man and the earth, they want to dispute the water, they will not take advantage of what water can bring to them. So this metaphor is against the egoism. It is a metaphor that intertwines with one of the most common statements of Ubuntu philosophy. I am because you are. And my humanity is defined according to my relationship with others. This is why most of the legends and stories of the founding of state, by state I mean the various Makua tribes, are attributed to the collective entities. One of the most famous version of the origin of Makua people, Shapan spoke about that, is the myth of Namuli. And the myth of Namuli aims to answer a fundamental philosophical question. Where did we come from? This is a fundamental. And various people have had a creation myth through the history. While the creation myth adopted in the West, is tributed or tributes the origin of humanities to two people, the Makua creation myth attributes the origin to a collective of people. And this is very important because trying to find out how this collective was constituted is a question that does not fit into the Makua cosmological concerns. The second, I would like to speak about the law of return. Mozambican historian Maria Paula Menezes defines history as a narration of the future through the past human acts. And this definition of history as a narration of the future is also echoed in Makua music. There is a Kwashala style song written by an artist from the city of Nacala called Rei Anaconda under the title of Advice. Interestingly, the title appears in Portuguese, but the lyric is all sang in a Makua language. It also happened with Carlitos Namakoto. His album is titled A Vida Tem Altos e Baixos, and in Portuguese, meaning life has ups and downs, but the lyrics are all down in Makua. And for me, this is so interesting because it shows a natural claim to be cosmopolite. It means a natural claim to be intercultural integrated. In this song, the artists convey a series of verses in the form of advices to his listeners. The verses contains many figures of speech, but there is one. He says, respect is a shitiki. You need to show me, so I will show you back. The image he uses for reciprocity is shitiki. Shitiki is a revolving saving credits done in various African communities. And in shitiki, I must give in order to receive it. Or if I receive, I must give. So this Rei Anaconda's verses refers to the respect. I must respect others so that they will also respect me. The law of return of the musician Anaconda is also used to draw attention to the need to be prudent. It's also used to participate actively in social and political life. There is a part of the music where he says, if you do not participate in the political and social life of your city, you will not ask the municipality to create goods for you. And it's also used to appear for people, or appealing for peoples to perform the tasks under their responsibilities with dedication. So in conclusion, I would like to say that Makua music, poetry, and oral literature are sources of wisdom and an active philosophical exercise. Makua cultural philosophy takes place generally in the public space, because it's in the public space where people deliver their discourses, their public speeches, their cultural and artistical production. And aims to impart wisdoms for life. The use of metaphors, the use of proverbs aims to stimulate the listener's brains, activating one of the spirit of philosophy. And one of the philosophical spirits is generating questions and not necessarily answers. Carlitos Namakoto's metaphor of man, water, and earth, and the Ray Anaconda's law of return are two examples on how Makua philosophy expressed through the cultural creation shares the common values of Ubuntu with other several African philosophies. So thank you for listening and for your attention.
For a very thoughtful contribution, which we will take into our discussion. I think we can use 15 minutes for discussion. Is that all right? 5. That's impossible. For 5, we either we don't discuss or we discuss for 15 minutes, I think. So I mean, let's take are there 2 or 3 really important questions that people would like to ask, and which will address hopefully more than one of the presentations. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is firstly to Professor Shaponi. Given the Makua linguistics here, it's contains a lot of Arabic words also. In analyzing the different forms of Makua, do you find those words in those languages also included? To Mr. Deveras, sorry, I didn't make the word. The question is in relation to the fact that a lot of literature is written in Catholicism. Do you find that cross-cultural integration in Mozambique, or is it very limited?
No, let's can I ask you a question to Devaka also, because you talked about language policy and books and Christianity and things having changed after 1960 and all these books becoming available. But I mean, isn't the more remarkable thing in a sense that there was nothing hardly before 1960, that there was a Portuguese policy which was against people learning to read and write in their local languages, and literacy was sort of bound up with Catholic Christianization and becoming part of and learning Portuguese. So and I think in Nampula province, the Campunani Italian missionaries were the ones who tried to produce missionary tracts and dictionaries and so on, but they were thrown out by the Portuguese, and then only allowed to come back around 1960, which was just 10 years before, or 15 years before the end of the Portuguese era. So I think, so that deeper history, I think, has consequences also. And that's why it's so difficult today to find written Makua texts to work with. And that's why Yusuf Abdul Rahman among the Zanzibaris was so keen to lay his hands on whatever he could get from these Kombonani publications. But maybe you could reflect upon that briefly also. Thank you. The question to Chapani.
Sorry, the question I was asking is, given our local culture has got a lot of Arabic words, given the dialectical differences in Mozambique, do they have a lot of Arabic words also in the Makua variations?
So we have time for an answer from each of you, I think, and I'm afraid that's all we have time for because our technical assistants have to leave. So would you like to go first?
Yeah, well, I guess I understood well the question. It's about the diversity of the variety of Makua dialects, right? If they reflect different repertoires. Yeah, it's a tough question. But yeah, there are some repertoires which reflect certain communities, but most of them, or let's say, there are always common aspects in all aspects of, in all, um, in everything, in all aspects of the life. They are common aspects. Oh, I'm repeating. How can I explain this? There are different repertoires in different societies of, or in different communities of Makua societies, right? But they all have some common structures. This is what I would say, you know. So we are Makua. It's not, although there are these varieties of dialects, it's not a kind of different ethno-linguistic groups. They are the same ethno-linguistic groups. And even the so-called Lomwe, well, because there are some linguistic and ethnographic works trying to separate them from the Makua. But they also have so many, maybe 80% of their culture, uh, linguistic construction, same as the Makua. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes, so I heard the question as whether we ought to attend also to the ways in which language, Makua language, was not given attention, was not written, was not in any way studied by the missionaries prior to 1960s or so. Yeah, that's right. And I would also add to that, just as another way to problematize the role of missionaries, I spoke very positively about these post-1960 ones, but I think on the issue of language, it's also worth considering the effect of creating dictionaries and grammars, and whether that might, although in one way help even members of the community to be able to name the language, to preserve it, to document it, to retain it, to teach it, to transmit it. On the other hand, it has the effect potentially of distorting things insofar as Makua has always been an oral language. And insofar as it's orally transmitted, it's dynamic, it's fluid, it's interactive with its neighboring languages, certainly Swahili, certainly Yao, certainly Makonde, et cetera, certainly Portuguese, certainly, as was mentioned, English and Zulu now. And so that kind of living character of language, one could suggest, is hard to retain if once we put it down in writing, because written word is a fixed word. Books, like dictionaries, have covers that bind them. And language, especially in its oral form, is anything but bound. And so the question could be asked, when languages are standardized in dictionaries and grammars, it serves certain purposes. The strong, let's say, post-colonial critique would be it serves the purpose of the powerful to better manage a population. or to better evangelize the population. So just to add another point of critique about where, even in this case, the post-Vatican, Second Vatican missionaries could be challenged in terms of what they're doing. I don't know if that hurts or helps the cause. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll hand over.
Thank you so much, Prof. We could go on and on, but we have to draw the line, unfortunately, and that's not to stifle any debates. I think the debates will continue in different fora. We have the research committee, which will take this process forward. I think we're coming to the end of our program, and as such, we have to honor the people that have contributed. And it's going to be my pleasure to before these gentlemen depart the stage, can we give them one round of applause, and to our contributors from online. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights. It's really appreciated. And we'll have to post you the gift that we're going to give out right now. So I think if you could join me, Prof, as you're going off the stage. We'd like to thank you. And if our photographers can come and just get pictures, nice pictures of our guests and our esteemed contributors. Can we give them another round of applause, guys? That was excellent. Thank you. The chair, okay, so I'd like the chairman, Alpha, and Uncle Wally. Also, can you come up? Although you are going to get one too, because you're a speaker today as well. To hand these gifts over. Mama Giles, can you please come up to stand with us and honor the guests, please? I know your feet are sore. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Preben. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Prof. Chapane, a round of applause. Thank you so much. He did so much work in organizing and arranging the speakers. I want to acknowledge his role in the organization. Uncle Alpha, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, for you must get one. You must get one too. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Sorry. No. So, colleagues,